In Lesson 5, we talk about amending the Constitution. And amending simply refers to or means changing. So we're talking about changing the Constitution. And it's important that we talk about changing the Constitution now because immediately after the ratification of the Constitution, there are going to be some changes that are made. And so we look at our learning objectives for the course, describe how the Constitution can be formally amended, explain the contents and significance of the Bill of Rights, and discuss the importance of the 13th, 14th, 15th, and 19th Amendments. Our departmental learning objectives are explain the origin and development of constitutional democracy in the United States and demonstrate knowledge of the federal system. So our essential questions are, how can the Constitution be formally changed? What are the Bill of Rights? What rights are protected, and what are their significance? And why are the 13th, 14th, 15th, and 19th Amendments particularly important? So, the amendments process. One of the biggest weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation was that all 13 states had to vote in favor of a change. And so this does not really facilitate any flexibility. It's going to be very hard to get 13 states to agree on things without significant compromise, and it's going to take a while. So by and large, it's going to be difficult to change the Articles of Confederation. And so the framers are going to realize this. They're going to go in knowing that, under the Articles of Confederation, it was hard, really hard, nearly impossible. And so they are going to build a process into the Constitution that makes it a little bit easier. Now, understand, it is not easy to amend the Constitution. It is a long process. It's very arduous. And so and that is on purpose. We want to make sure that different regimes, and when I say regime, I'm just simply talking about new governments that come into power, right? We have a democracy, but we have different people who run that democracy. And so anybody who is a newly elected individual is a new regime. We sometimes associate regime with a negative connotation, but you really should dispel that. But anyway, we have an arduous process so that the new regime that comes in doesn't just change the Constitution to fit their own will. And so it is an arduous task. However, it is easier to do than it was under the Articles of Confederation. And since ratification, since 1789, the Constitution has actually only been changed 27 times, which is pretty dang good, especially when you look at some of the state constitutions like Texas, that's got like 400 amendments. And so there, this arduous process has really played its part in ensuring that only the really important amendments get passed. So, the amendment process. The first 10 amendments are the Bill of Rights, and they are going to be added nearly immediately after all the states ratify, because we saw in the last lecture that Rhode Island in 1790 is going to be the last state to ratify in 1790. I think I just said that, very redundant, but the Bill of Rights will be added after that. And the Bill of Rights are going to be in response to complaints from the Anti-Federalists that the Constitution made the government way too powerful and didn't really protect the individual liberties of the people. And so, in an effort to get the Anti-Federalists on board with the Constitution and with ratification, it was agreed that these would be added to the Constitution following its ratification process. And so James Madison, he was a member of Congress from Virginia, he will draft 19 potential changes. And, Madison is actually one of the main authors of the Constitution, and so it's fitting that he would be the one to draft these changes. He submits them to Congress, and Congress is going to adopt 12 of them. And so they will pass a 2/3 majority vote in the Congress, in both the House and the Senate, and then they're going to be sent to the states. But of these 12, only 10 are going to be accepted by a 3/4 vote of all state legislatures. So we end up with 10 amendments in our Bill of Rights. So I probably put the cart a little before the horse, but the process of amending the Constitution is like this. If you look at Article 5 of the Constitution, it's going to outline how the process works. And it can originate from one of two sources. So an amendment or a change proposal can originate from one of two sources. First, it can be proposed by Congress and approved by a two-thirds majority vote in both chambers, as the 12 were that were sent to the states for approval of the Bill of Rights. And then you were going to send it to the states for ratification, and the states have two ways to ratify or defeat. The first way to ratify or defeat is that 3/4 of the state legislatures ratify and it becomes a part of the Constitution, or 3/4 of state ratifying conventions support the amendment. Right? The second way that it can originate is 2/3 of the states petition Congress. And when this occurs, Congress must call a convention for proposing amendments. Once they've proposed the amendment at this convention, it will be forwarded to the states for ratification by 3/4 of state legislatures. Now, all current constitutional amendments were created using the first method of proposal, by being proposed by Congress and sent to the states for ratification. Right? So we've never had an amendment convention called by Congress because 2/3 of the states petitioned them to do so. And so what the amendment process does is it creates what is known as a living document. And a living document simply means that there is some flexibility and it does change over time. It is not a stagnant document that is in the archive somewhere on a dusty shelf. It is a document that allows for flexibility to deal with the issues that are facing the nation in modern time. And the amendment process allows for this flexibility. It responds to the nation's changing needs, and it has helped keep our Constitution in effect for a very long period of time, 225 plus years. And so it creates a living document that is flexible to the changing needs of a nation, but it is sufficiently difficult that it cannot be changed on a whim of a president or a Congress or something of that nature. So it creates a very flexible type of document. And so we'll look at some key changes to the Constitution. We know that the Bill of Rights are going to be some very key changes to the Constitution, those first 10 amendments, and they are going to be used to assuage fears of the anti-federalists. They're going to guarantee our individual rights. And if you look at the Bill of Rights, they're all going to really pertain to the people and to the states. They're all going to be limiters of the national government. It's going to tell what the national government essentially cannot do. And in the First Amendment, we have the freedom to speech, religion, press, petition, assembly. And it's going to protect us, our rights to speak freely, practice whatever religion we see fit, write, articles even if they go against what the government is trying to talk about, petition to change the government or to change a law with the government, and the right to assemble peacefully, right? Now, there are no absolutes, and we'll talk more about this when we talk about civil liberties and civil rights. There are no absolutes. We are not absolutely guaranteed the freedom of speech. We are not absolutely guaranteed the freedom of press and assembly. We have to do so in an orderly manner that does not cause libel or does not cause slander. So there are limits to our rights, but they cannot be taken away from us. There's also there's a bunch of stuff in the Bill of Rights, and we're going to look at those a little bit more later on, but they deal with trial by jury, protection from excessive fines, protects us from cruel and unusual punishment. And again, when we talk about civil liberties and civil rights, we're going to cover this more in depth. So just know that the Bill of Rights is going to protect us and going to give us certain things to protect us from an oppressive government. But there are amendments that come after the Bill of Rights that are significant. And amendments are proposed usually to rectify problems that have arisen over the years and that reflect a changing nation. And so the whole process of amending the Constitution is going to give the Constitution some flexibility to respond to our nation, because we are certainly not the same nation as we were after the Revolutionary War, after ratification in 1789. And so we have to change in order to accommodate this all of this evolution that is occurring in the United States. And so they are usually put into place to rectify an issue because things change. The first one that we'll talk about is the 17th Amendment. And we've mentioned this before, but it is the direct election of senators. When the Constitution was created, remember, senators were appointed by state legislatures. And during the progressive movement, one of the policies that progressives really pushed for was going to be less corruption in government. And one of the things that they wanted to do was they wanted to get rid of this backroom politics where things were kind of done in a shady manner. And so if you expose that to the people and you allow the people to vote for individuals instead of them being appointed, it's this idea that we move away from corruption and we move more towards a government that is more democratic and more responsive to the individual. So, and we're going to have the 17th Amendment added to the Constitution. I want to say in 1913. I apologize, I do not have that that information handy, but I can look it up real quick. So 17th Amendment. Let's see. The 17th Amendment. Yes, 1913. So it will be put into place in 1913. The 18th Amendment, also one of those progressive ideas, was the ban of the manufacture, sale, distribution, and transport of alcohol. This is going to, I beg your pardon on that. Whoops. This is going to, now understand that it doesn't forbid you to drink it. It just simply forbids you to manufacture it, sell it, distribute it, or transport it. And this is going to be one of those progressive ideas that is instituted in 1919. The 20th Amendment changes the inauguration day from March to January. We're in the middle of a crisis during this time period, and it's thought that the government should take effect a little bit closer to election time. And so this is going to be passed in 1932 during the heights of the Great Depression. And so there's only going to be from November to January of a transition period rather than from from November to March as a transition period. The 21st Amendment is going to repeal the 18th Amendment and prohibit alcohol. And actually the 18th Amendment, I need to go back to that. It's interesting because the 18th Amendment is really the only amendment passed that doesn't further individual rights and liberties and benefit the people. It actually is going to be writing somebody's bias into the Constitution, because there was a group of people called the temperance movement that thought that alcohol was a bad thing and was leading to the moral corruption of our society. So they sort of champion their bias into the Constitution. And so the 21st Amendment is going to rectify that. And then the 22nd Amendment limits the president to 2 years in office. So after FDR passes and Truman takes over, after, I believe it's even after Truman's administration, there is this amendment that is going to be passed in 1951 that says a president can only serve 2 terms in office. Now, they can finish out a president's term if it's 2 years or less and then run for 2 more terms. So you can actually see a president in office for 10 years. But if they finish out a term that's 3 years, 2 years or more, they can only run for one full term. So the 22nd Amendment. Then there are going to be some other significant amendments passed. We have the Civil War amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which are going to be ratified after the Civil War. The 13th abolishes slavery in the United States. The 14th is going to grant citizenship to African Americans and anybody else. It's going to be the Equal Protection amendment that allows you to be a citizen regardless of race and color. This is also going to prohibit states from depriving residents of life, liberty, or property without legal proceeding. And so it's going to take those ideas and institute those in the states. And it's going to grant men the right to vote regardless of race or color. Now note that women are still not allowed to vote, but no longer is it just property owning white men. Now former slaves and any subsequent individual, regardless of race or color, is going to be allowed to participate in the election process. Now, states will be very ingenuitive in their ability to limit these individuals from taking part by intimidation and poll tax and literacy tests and things like that. So it by no means fixes the problem, but it's a step in the right direction. The 19th Amendment, which this year we will celebrate the 100th anniversary, finally gives women the right to vote. And this is going to be championed by the progressive movement that actually also championed the temperance movement and that 18th Amendment, which banned alcohol. But this is a good thing. It's going to bring an entirely new group of individuals into the fold and allow them to participate in the process of politics and elections. Some others amendments that are very worthy of mentioning. They are going to be amendments that extend suffrage to other groups. So we've already talked about the 19th Amendment that extends suffrage to women. There's actually going to be some others that are instrumental in extending suffrage to other groups that might have been marginalized. The 23rd Amendment is going to allow residents of Washington, D.C. to vote for president. As you probably know, Washington, D.C. is not a state, it's a district. And so prior to the 23rd Amendment, the passage of the 23rd Amendment, which took place in 1961, these individuals who lived within the district weren't allowed to vote for president. And so it extends more democracy to these American citizens who couldn't actually participate in that process. The 24th Amendment is going to abolish the poll tax, which I said that states became very ingenious at finding ways to keep marginalized groups from participating in the process. And one of the things that they did was to charge money to vote. Well, voting should be a free thing for all citizens. And so the 24th Amendment will get rid of this poll tax, and so it's going to lessen the marginalization of individuals. The 26th Amendment is going to reduce the voting age from 21 to 18, and this is going to be significant because this is going to be at a time when America is embroiled in the Vietnam War, and we're drafting 18-year-olds, but these 18-year-olds can't even vote. They can't vote till they're 21, so they're not able to vote for the individual sending them into harm's way. And so there is this movement to change the voting age from 18 to 21. And so, anyway, just a few of the constitutional changes that are significant. We will be dealing with the constitutional amendments a little bit more as we move forward. But here are some very specific ones that have led to, by and large, more rights protected for individuals. And so in the next in the next lecture, we're going to be dealing with a very heavy topic known as federalism. And federalism is an extremely important idea within the American government. And so I apologize ahead of time that it's going to be kind of dense and the lectures might be a little bit longer, but we have to understand federalism in order to understand the American way of democracy. And so I'll see you then, and also if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or criticisms, feel free to contact me via one of those contact communication tools outlined in your syllabus. Thanks a lot.